I do want to bring up the fact that it's the 100 years since Bloody Sunday, and of course you did that brilliant book, The Bloody Field. You're going to do an update this year. Can you just explain what brought you to do an update?
Yeah, well, I suppose the fact that it's the centenary anyway this year, you obviously be looking at it and going, well, can we do something, you know? So I suppose back that time the first book came out in 2014. So around back that time it was difficult, you know, obviously to try to find family members of people who were related to the victims, because I mean just finding their stories in itself was a job. There was a lot of needles and haystack type research. So if you found any family members, it was kind of by luck and by, you know, you were just delighted. But in the meantime, you know, we've been able, obviously with the book coming out, and also you had the Bloody Sunday, the GA's Bloody Sunday Graves Project, which when, you know, back in 2014, 2015, there was 8 of the 14 victims were on unmarked graves. So the GA, in conjunction with the families, have erected 7 graves out of 8 now, gravestones out of 8 for them. So you were able to obviously meet the families through that. So through all of that, you know, you were able to talk to them and kind of find out more about their experience of their relatives dying and how it impacted on the families through the years, and also just add more detail to the stories of the victims that would have come from the family stories. And I suppose how Bloody Sunday and the massacre in Croke Park is perceived now, because I suppose when the book came out, there wasn't really an awful lot. There'd only been ever one other book written about Bloody Sunday, and that was back in the 60s. And that was mainly about the Michael Collins stuff in the morning. So, I mean, this was kind of the first book, the first effort to kind of put shape and make on the Croke Park aspect of that day. So I suppose it allowed however many people wanted to kind of sort of engage with that story a bit more and make sense of it a little bit more and kind of think and absorb it a little bit more in different ways. And I think, you know, a lot of aspects of that story are, even though it happened 100 years ago, they are relatable. I mean, you've 3 schoolboys, 10, 11, 14 years of age died. I always think, and particularly in the last little while, Jerome O'Leary was one of the people who we put a gravestone up for last November at the anniversary. And Jerome was 10. He was the youngest of the victims to die. He has no family left. So, you know, the lads in Croke Park were calling me to say, look, can you just corroborate his name and address and basically be the point of contact for a child who has no family anymore. And I said a few words at the grave as well. And it just kind of, it gets you thinking, geez, I mean, certainly number one, this certainly wasn't what I expected to be doing when I wrote that book 6 years ago. But secondly, like, you know, I was 10 when I went to my first match in Croke Park. It was my first time in Croke Park when I was 10 years of age. And, you know, you just immediately, I can remember being so excited about going there, and I can remember a good bit about the day and all. And you just think, well, Jerome at 10, that's the excitement he would have had, you know. So you can relate to that. You can relate to, you know, one man went to the game, James Matthews. His wife was pregnant. He had 2 daughters at home. You can relate to him as a father and an expectant father. It's all sorts of aspects to it, and their jobs, their ages, where they were coming from, their backstories, what they were doing, and the very fact that they were going to Croke Park, like we all have down the years, to watch a game and to enjoy the game. And the very last thing that was on their minds, or on anybody's mind, was that there was going to be something so appalling and so tragic happen. So I suppose all of those themes and all of those ideas kind of even came more to the fore in the last 5 or 6 years. And I mean, it's been, like, I found it at times a very emotional kind of, I don't want to say journey, but very emotional episodes, we'll say, in, deriving from the book, meeting families, going to the grave commemorations, talking to people about it, and seeing how it impacts on people. It's been, it changes you. It changes you, and it kind of, it certainly, I just felt that, you know, the year that was in it, it was kind of, it would be nice and it would be important to try and reflect some of that in an updated version of the book.
And would you have like just go down that rabbit hole in terms of how it made you feel, and saying the words at Jerome O'Leary's graveside? Geez, that must have been very, very unusual feeling, was it?
Um, well, it was you. I'll be honest with you. It was actually it was a privilege, to be honest. Um, it was a real privilege to be asked to speak about somebody that you didn't know, but that you kind of felt a certain And I'm always very conscious, because I've kind of had this story in front of me for the guts of 10 years now. This isn't my grief. The grief is the family's grief, or the loss is the family's, not my loss. But having kind of walked through some of these stories and live and kind of looked into these stories, I do feel a certain caring for all of them. And funny enough, with Jerome, when I was researching, one of the places I went was the National Newspaper Library in London. And looking through the tabloid newspapers at the time, I found a picture of Jerome. So I always had a picture of him, which you couldn't say for all the victims. I've now got pictures of maybe 8 or 9, I think. But Jerome was one of the only ones I had back then. And you'd look at this kid, and you just think, Christ, I mean, he went to a match. He was 10 years of age. Somebody saw him and actually lifted him up onto the back wall of the canal end so he could see the game better. And then the shooting started, and he was the second victim. The second bullet hit him. Like, the randomness of it, and then being asked to speak. Sorry, to go back to your original question. I mean, the feeling was just, you're just holding it together, and you just want to do him justice, because after 99 years, his memory had been forgotten. I mean, it's true, no, and I'm not blaming anybody for that. It's just life. His story and his name had been forgotten. So I just wanted to do him some kind of justice, and respect his memory, and make sure that whoever was there that day went away knowing Jerome's name and knowing a little bit more about him, and maybe thinking slightly differently about what happened that day.
You've been very good with your time, but there's just one other thing I wanted to ask you. I mean, I could talk to you all day about that, but one thing in particular, were there many myths about that day at Croke Park that you kind of had to debunk, or you found out, right, well, there's this story, for example, the Michael Collins portrayal of it, the tank rolling onto the field. Was it very different to how people would have thought about it in popular culture?
Yeah, short answer, yeah. And there's two aspects to the myth thing. The first aspect is what you mentioned there, would say the Michael Collins, the media portrayal of it, let's say, right? So you have the Michael Collins, an armored car rolls on, if people can't remember. An armored car rolls into the middle of Croke Park, and basically a machine gun opens fire on the crowd. That never happened. That never, ever happened. What I'd say about that is that, in fairness to Neil Jordan, that was 1996, 97, that movie came out. We didn't have the information in 96, 97, unless Neil Jordan went back and combed the newspapers at the time. The information wasn't easily available to him to actually depict what happened exactly. There was 2 inquiries done at the time into what happened in Croke Park. The reports they weren't even published, actually. They were sealed for 90 odd years. They weren't actually made available to the public until 2003, 2004. So it was only then that we could really see exactly what happened. So you have that aspect of it. But then you have another aspect, which is small little things, like, for example, a lot of people thought it was an All-Ireland final. It was a challenge game. Michael Hogan, the tip player who was killed, people said he was the captain. He wasn't. He was a young fella in his second year on the tip team at cornerback, who was extremely worried about marking the best forward in the Dublin team. So small, bits and pieces that, when you add them all together, give you a very different kind of sense of the game. Like, you had I went back looking at the numbers, how many were killed. Some said 12, some said 16, some said 15. The names of some of the victims were wrong, basically, even on plaques and stuff like that. They were just wrong. So you had that aspect of it. You also then had the aspect of family stories. And in some cases, stories went down through families and through communities about what happened. Some of them were right. Some of them were half-truths. Some of them were maybe told as truth, but they weren't right, basically. Like, there would have been, I can think of one in particular, without saying which the victim was. They were saying he was shot, but if you looked at the autopsy report, which I was able to look at, you could see that he had been crushed and trampled, for example. But obviously, being shot was a very emotive thing for the family, and they were happy to believe that he was shot, and that's fine. So you had a lot of that kind of sort of push me, pull you, kind of nip and tuck around the story. And as I'd say to people when I'd be talking to them, I respect entirely whatever the story anybody has been reared with. I'm only coming to this and just pulling together as much as I possibly can and giving what I believe is the version of the story that I think is the most accurate. But if anyone came to me with absolute solid evidence that something that was there was different, I was always happy to change it. And there are tweaks in the new update to kind of reflect that. That more information comes on stream, more official information, and more family stuff comes on stream that we can now feed into it. Like history, it's funny because history is something that happened before, so the story is over. But these stories are always evolving because we can always learn more about stuff that happened in the past. If you ask 10 people to describe one incident, you probably get 8 or 9 different details in all of those accounts. So that's why history evolves constantly, and you're constantly revisiting it and revising it and trying to bring it even closer to the actual truth of what happened. And that's been the case with the Bloody Sunday story all the way along. And it's been challenging, trying, heartbreaking, enjoyable, exciting. It's had a huge impact emotionally, mentally, everything. And people might be going, "What is he talking about? How can something that happen?" But it does. It does when you walk into this. And I've seen it. I've told this story to people just chatting in a pub or chatting over a cup of tea or whatever, and it does something to people. It does something to people all the time. John Horan mentioned the 14 victims in his speech on Saturday at GA Congress. The last time I checked, which was yesterday, there was nearly 20,000 views on that 2 minutes of footage on Twitter, which it amazed me again, because I was like, where there's an emotional pull to this story that I think people can actually relate to. They can relate to it once they open themselves up to the story and let it in at all. It draws them in, and it's what happened to me, and I think it's what I've noticed has happened to other people who've engaged with the story as well.
Yeah, I've read your book, and plenty of people who I know have. Just think it's great stuff, and I'd encourage anyone to have a listen or a read of it and check out maybe the update too. But you've been very good with your time, Michael. So I appreciate you joining me talking about all sorts there, and hopefully we'll do it again soon. Thanks for watching Our Game. Don't forget to like and share the videos, and if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe.